Okay, so we continue in the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe's Code of Law, chapter 472, Tuf Ayin Beis, and we're looking at the laws of the 4 cups of wine. Yesterday, we learned the first 2 laws. Number 1 is, the first 3 we learned. No, not 2, not 19 yet. So we learned, did we? No, we learned 17, 18, 19. So first we learned that you have to have no, it's 2 years ago. So we learned the size of a revius, how much a revius is. That's the first thing we did. Then we learned that there's 2 opinions as to how much you have to drink. Opinion A is that the best thing is to drink full cup, no matter how big it is, even if it happens to be a bunch of revius. And in best case scenario, drink the majority of the cup. It's opinion A. Opinion B is it doesn't matter how big your cup is, you just have to drink the majority of a revius. The majority of a revius, which is a cheekful, is very little. So he said that the Chabad custom is to drink the whole cup. In best case, can't at least the majority of the cup. But the halacha remains a cheekful is enough, especially in places where there's not a lot of wine and you have to preserve, then a cheekful is enough. The best option is to get smaller cups, and that way you're fulfilling you're saving on wine, and you're fulfilling the first opinion, which is the higher standard opinion, which said to drink the full cup. Okay. That's what we learned so far. Now we're halacha chaf, halacha 20.
Before you go forward, what about the dilution?
So we learned.
Yes, 3-to-1.
Right. Okay. So the Alter Rebbe wrote that the ratio in Talmudic times where it was like pure wine essence is 3-to-1, but today the ratio is that it should be to your liking. Meaning, if the wine you have is not so strong, then don't dilute it at all. If it's too strong that you don't enjoy it, then you fulfill the mitzvah of drinking wine when you drink it, but you're lacking the freedom element because you don't enjoy it, and therefore dilute it to your liking. Yeah. One still has to be careful that this, just parenthetically, that they don't dilute it so much to the point that it's no longer hagafen. Like, the grape juice that they make, the light grape juice, it's so light that if you add more water to that, I don't even know that you can make hagafen anymore because it loses all of its flavor. So one must be very careful about that if the flavor is gone so much, then it may not be hagafen anymore. So you got to be careful with that. Okay, which is also parenthetically a question for mixing mashka and wine in kiddush. Like, at what ratio do you make hagafen now? Especially since our wine's been diluted already. If that mashka was water, how diluted would your wine be? And that's how you have to treat that mashka too. Just have to be careful when you add mashka to wine. If people want to do, they want to get a higher percentage alcohol in their kiddush. Be careful you don't do so much to the point that you're no longer making a hagafen. Or at least you're running into a question as to whether it's a hagafen or not. Okay. Halacha chaf. Sarich lizar. One is to be careful, l'chatchila, in the best case scenario. Lishto siroiv haravias, to drink that majority of a revius, that is to say the absolute minimal amount of wine to be drunk by the lowest standard opinion, which would be the majority of a revius, which is a cheekful. One should be careful to do so b'vas achas in one shot. What does it mean in one shot? The highness means to say sheyishta oisa b'shtia achas. It should be gulped in one gulping, in one drinking. Right? This is indeed the Lubavitch custom, as he says there in footnote 78. And not to break it up into 2, which means, so what he's saying is, when you raise your cup and you're drinking the 4 cups of wine, you're not drinking, sipping slowly until you finish the entire cup. The first intake should be a full cheekful in one swallow, in one intake. Okay. It's a majority of a revius, which is a cheekful. It's not a lot. The point is, you should be sipping it down. You should be drinking it down. If you drink it down, and normally you should.
Understanding what, like a kazayas, we have an idea.
Yeah, so it's majority of a revius. A revius is 2.8 fluid ounces, so this is what 1.5 ounces. It's not so much.
That's a cheap.
It just means not to sip it. But if you drink it properly, it'll happen anyway. Therefore, one shouldn't have a cup whose top is narrow, shekarin klug glass, which is called a klug glass. I'm not sure what that is. because it's very difficult to drink the full revius in one shot. Now, that's interesting. I imagine it's something. This club glass is something like the those sniffers, where there's Scotch glasses where you have the bottom is round and the top gets narrow.
Yeah.
I think it's called a sniffer, right? Is it called? Anyway, I mean, those are very difficult to, because the majority of the wine's at the bottom, so it doesn't come down in one go. It has to be filtered through the narrower top. Anyway. Nonetheless, but the evidence in the post factum, even if he took pauses many times in his drinking, he sipped, Yatza, he fulfilled his obligation. But nonetheless, so issue number one is that we take it in one gulp. That's one issue. Best case scenario in one gulp, second best in number of sips. But there's another issue you run into, which is how much time elapsed from the beginning of the drinking to the end of the drinking. It's a separate issue. Right? So if I'm sipping, so I can consistently sip without stopping. And it could take me a good 10 minutes to drink the revius, depending how much I drink in each sip. Right? So now I run into a different issue, which is how much time elapsed from the beginning to the end of the drinking, which is what he addresses here. So even if I drink it in one gulp, obviously there's no time elapsing from the beginning to the end of my drinking because I drank it in one gulp. But if I drink it in sips, then I run into that second issue, which is how much time elapsed, and therefore, we got to be careful not to allow time to elapse from the beginning of the drinking to the end of the drinking, the amount of time it takes to finish a half a loaf of bread. That's like the sages measure for one unit of eating is the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread. Half of those old loaves. Okay, let's look at footnote 82. It gives us the measures of this. Okay, 82. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
The halachic definition of this measure vary from 3 to 9 minutes, depending on who you ask, what the size of that loaf is and how long it takes to eat the half of it. See notes in Sefer Minhagim Chabad, page 45. Now, based on Shiurei Torah, which I mentioned yesterday, is a book written by Rabbi Levi, which goes through halachic measures using modern metrics, written by a famous Chabad Rav in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Avram Chaim Noah. So he writes that the accepted Lubavitch practice is to consider kedei achilas pras, the amount of time it takes to eat this half of loaf, as 4 minutes, when defining a time frame within one must eat the statutory kazayas of matzah and the 4 cups of wine for the Seder Pesach, but as 9 minutes with regard to eating on Yom Kippur. In other words, you take the stringent of both. So the time described here as eating half a loaf is the amount of time for one eating unit. So on Pesach, you want to eat your matzah in one eating unit, and you want to drink your wine in one eating unit. And therefore, you go to the minimum size and say, eat it within this time frame of 4 minutes. That way it's considered one eating unit. So however much matzah you have to eat it within the 4 minutes. However much wine you have to drink it within the 4 minutes. Drinking obviously is much, much easier to do within 4 minutes. Even if you sipped 3 ounces of wine, you're still doing it within 4 minutes.
Right, of course.
Right, but the matzah could take a little longer. Okay, now sometimes taking the shorter number is actually a leniency, not a stringency. Namely on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, one doesn't eat at all, obviously. But if someone must eat because they're not well, then what we try to do is we try to make them eat in such a way that they're never eating the amount within the time frame of a single eating unit, right? Which is not a kazayis, actually. It's like a kaiseves. It's a bit bigger. But nonetheless, and the reason for this is because even though you're not allowed to eat anything on Yom Kippur, you're only liable for the Torah punishment if you ate a full eating unit within the time frame. So now you want to eat half the eating unit in 2 separate eating time frames. So in that case, you want to go to the more stringent opinion and give more space between the 2 halves, that you're definitely not within the time frame, and therefore use the 9-minute measure. So you're stringent basically on both ends. When you're trying to eat within the time frame, take the smaller time frame. When you're trying to eat outside of the time frame, take the bigger time frame. So on Pesach, you're trying to eat within the time frame, go to the 4 minutes. On Yom Kippur, you're trying to eat out of the time frame, go take the 9 minutes. So every 10 minutes, have a little bit. So in cases like this, I've worked with the Rabbanim here in Montreal for people who need this. You have shot glasses, these pre-measured shot glasses that are less than the Revius, and you buy high in protein shakes or mixes, right? Or you make a blend that's very, very dense in its fiber and its protein, and then you just have every 10 minutes take a shot of those things, and you can live that way. So obviously it's not allowed because you're not allowed to eat anything on Yom Kippur, but it saves the person who's eating from any punishment that the Torah administers for that eating. Okay, sorry. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're halacha 20. 472, not 473. Which one is that one?
472.
Okay, halacha 20, yeah. The Yesh Oimrim, those that say, okay, so this one said not to allow, you have to drink all the wine of each cup within the time frame of, we're going to say 4 minutes, which is the amount of time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread of ancient time. Today, achilas pras. Now, Yesh Oimrim, others say, shetzorech shelo yisha, you have to make sure that there doesn't elapse the amount of time, mitchila shtiya, from the beginning of the drinking, Rishona, of the first one, meaning your first sip, to the end of your last sip of that one cup, more than the amount of time it takes to drink a revius. In other words, like this. The dispute is, right, the Gemara gives a unit called, the Gemara gives a unit called a achilas pras, the amount of time it takes to eat a portion of bread, which is okay, read it in a second. 82 or 83?
82.
The one we read before?
Oh yeah, we read that one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we're gonna read 83 in a minute.
Okay.
So the Gemara gives a unit called achilas pras, the amount of time it takes to eat. Pras means like a measure, the amount of time it takes to eat like a portion. That's considered a time frame of eating, of a singular eating unit. Now the question is, does that measure, which we just described as 4 minutes, for our context, the amount of time it takes to eat that bread, which is like your singular portion, does that unit of time apply to eating or also to drinking? Or when you measure the amount of time it takes for a unit of singular drinking, you don't go by the measure of eating, you go by the measure of drinking, which is drinking a revius, which would be the full unit of drinking. Now, the amount of time it takes to drink a revius is significantly shorter than the amount of time it takes to eat a portion of bread. It doesn't take 4 minutes to drink a revius of wine, which means you can't just slowly sip your cup of wine from your 4 cups if you drink it properly. And that's the discussion here. So let's look at footnote 83. So he told us to look in chapter 6:12. So it says the footnote, that section which deals with the prohibition against drinking on Yom Kippur, right? So again, you want to separate when you're drinking on Yom Kippur for someone who's sick, and you want to, what's called shiurim, you want them to drink less than the amount that they would be liable for punishment, even though it's forbidden to anybody else, but you want to drink less than the amount that's liable for punishment. So you want to drink less than a revius within the time frame of a singular drinking unit. So you have to drink less than revius, but spaced out over time, so that you never drink the time frame, you never drink a full singular drinking in a full singular unit of time. Yeah? So you're spacing it out. So let's see. So that section which deals with the prohibition against eating on Yom Kippur states that it is proper to follow the stringencies implied by the form of you, i.e., that the interval between drinking should be longer than Kedei Achilas Pras, the 9 minutes. Right? So even though over here we're giving an opinion which says that the unit of drinking is measured by the unit of drinking time, not by the unit of eating time, but you want to be stringent on Yom Kippur to be 100% sure that your singular drinking unit is not in any singular unit of time. Now, the biggest unit of time is the amount of time it takes to be eating, which is bigger than drinking, and therefore space out your drinking by the eating measure. So that's definitely not in the same time frame, right? So it's giving you the more stringent view. But again, here, stringency would be to drink within the time frame, so you want to go to the smaller time frame, not the bigger one, right? When you're trying to drink out of the time frame, you want to go to the larger unit of time. When you're trying to drink within the time frame, you want to go to the smaller unit of time. That way you're being stringent on both ends. Okay. Continuing in the footnote here, this issue is also discussed by the Alter Rebbe in Seder Birchas Hanenin. Seder Birchas Hanenin is a work that the Alter Rebbe wrote independent of the Shulchan Aruch that goes to the laws of making brachas.
Wow.
Yeah, printed in the back of the
I didn't know it
standard.
was independent.
Well, there is Seder Birchas Hanenin, the laws of blessings in the Shulchan Aruch.
Right.
Then there's two separate works where the Alter Rebbe discusses the laws of making brachas. Okay, so in this work called Seder Birchas Hanenin, there's an English version available, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So they're discussing with regard to the measure of time in which liquids must be drunk for separate swallows to be combined to regard a blessing to be recited afterwards, e.g., when one drinks hot tea or coffee slowly. So it goes like this. In order to the bracha you make before you eat, it doesn't matter how much you're eating, you have to make a bracha. Right? Before you start eating, no matter how much you're going to be eating, you have to make a bracha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For the after bracha, the Torah says you have to be satisfied. So you have to have drank or ate a significant unit within a significant unit of time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the same measure you're talking about here, in order to qualify that you're making a bracha afterwards. So if I'm drinking my coffee very, very slowly, so I never drank the full amount in that small unit of time. So do I have to make a bracha afterwards or not? Maybe I can't, because I never drank enough within the singular frame unit of time to be considered a single or full unit of drinking. Okay, so continue, right? So let's continue.
Wow.
So there, the Alter Rebbe rules then fundamentally. He says like this. He should say that. There, the Alter Rebbe rules that fundamentally, the halacha follows the opinion that as long as the entire interval is less than kedei achillas pras, so if the entire amount of time it took me to drink was less than that 4-minute unit, which is the amount of time it takes to eat a unit of eating, even though it's significantly bigger than the amount of time it takes to do a unit of drinking revius, a blessing is required. So in other words, like this is really common with coffee. When you're drinking coffee at the beginning, if it stays hot the whole time, you're sipping very little. Right. And if you are to measure the the intake of drinking based on the amount of time it takes to drink a revius, you're certainly going over it. How long does it take to drink a revius? 35 seconds, 45 seconds. But you're drinking your sips of coffee, you don't get to a revius until 2, 3, 4 minutes later.
Right.
So if you stop then, if you follow the measure of unit for time based on drinking, you would make a bracha afterwards. But says the Alter Rebbe there, you fundamentally follow the unit of time defined by eating, which is 4 minutes long, even though you're doing drinking now. Right? So therefore, fundamentally, the halacha really would be that your drinking of the 4 cups of wine should be within, the drinking of each of the 4 cups of wine should be within 4 minutes, which is the eating measure of time. But nonetheless, there's no reason not to be stringent and go with the view that says to drink it within the drinking amount of time, which is much significantly less. Follow?
And is there a modern understanding of what kedei achillas pras is?
So again, it's either 4 or 9. It's somewhere, it varies between 4 or 9 minutes on the stringent or lenient side. So, well,
3 and 9.
4 or 9 minutes.
It's a 3 before.
Yeah. Footnote 82.
Oh, I read it in Sparia.
4 minutes.
So what's the 72-minute?
No, you're right. Sorry, 3 to 9. I'm sorry. You're right. 3 to 9. Yeah. My apologies. Sorry.
What's the 72-minute thing?
That's not a description of how quickly you have to eat. It's a question of when you stop eating, how long later is the food still within your body so that you can be making the bracha? Or is your food already digested and therefore you can't make a after blessing anymore?
Is that still part of the previous eating?
No.
That's not the question.
So again, I ate this morning,
Right.
but 5 hours ago. I can't thank Hashem for that food because that food's already been consumed and the waste has been removed.
Right.
So I have to bench within the time that that food's still in me and being processed. That's a 72-minute measure.
Oh, okay.
You forget to bench after lunch on Shabbos and you fall asleep and you wake up. No.
Too late, you might not be able to bench.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's recap what we have to understand where we're going. So we're talking about drinking the 4 cups of wine. It has to be consumed within, there's 2 elements here. Number 1, how much you have to consume, right? Or 3 elements. Number 1, how much you have to consume, a majority of it is. That's the minimum. Issue 2 is it should be drunk, at least in the first case scenario, in 1 gulp. If you do that, you save all the issues. You drank your majority of it, which is very little, 2 ounces in 1 cup, in 1 gulp. If you sipped it, you fulfilled your obligation. But so long as that all the sippings, the totality of how much you have to drink, which is the majority of it, Revius, is drunk within the time frame to consider that sipping a singular unit of drinking. If it's too long, it's not a singular unit of drinking anymore. Okay, so how do I define a singular unit of drinking? There are two measures. One to be measured by what's considered a singular unit of eating. That would be the 3-minute minimum, right? Or a single unit of drinking, which is the amount of time it takes to drink a Revius, which is significantly less than 3 minutes. How long does it take to drink a Revius wine? Or drink a Revius of water? 45 seconds, right? Okay. So now, obviously, to avoid all this issue, all you have to do is, drink in one gulp. But say there's someone who has difficulty doing that. The person's throat hurts,
Right.
difficulty swallowing, and every time they take a sip, it hurts. Yeah. So they have to make sure they're drinking within a certain time frame. Otherwise, they're not drinking a singular cup of wine. Right?
So it goes back to my point from earlier in the week.
Sorry? Yeah, I was. Yes, I was making criticism of the language.
Okay, fine.
Right?
Fair enough.
Okay. So it says out there, therefore, yesh lachos, one should be stringent, the divrayim, to these latter opinion, which says that in order for the drinking of wine to be constitute a singular one cup of wine, it has to be within the time frame that it takes to drink a revius of wine, which is very short. Right? You should be stringent in that opinion, in that regard. With respect to the first 2 cups of wine. Why would the first 2 cups of wine be different than the last 2? Explains. Because if you were to take sips of your first 2 cups of wine and made such a long break between them, to the point that from the first sip until the last sip, longer than the amount of time it will take to drink a revius, so the person his throat really hurts. Every time they take a sip, they have to recover their throat. So by the time they're done taking all the sips, it took them longer than the amount of time it would take to drink a revius. So you have to go back and drink that cup again because you didn't drink a singular cup. You drank sips, and they were so separated that the first sip is unrelated to the last sip, and therefore it's not considered a singular unit of drinking. So you got to drink that cup again. But below bracha, without a bracha. Why without a bracha? Because according to the other opinions, it is considered in one unit because it was within 3 minutes, which is within the amount of time it takes to eat a singular unit. So you can't make the bracha again, but you have to drink the cup again. Yeah? Okay, that's all fine with the first 2 cups of wine. But cup 3 and 4, you don't have that same option. Why? But the second 2 cups of wine, cup 3 and 4, that if we were to require them to drink the cup again, what's our problem? It's going to seem as though you're adding to the amount of cups of wine. Commotion is barlamila, as we explained above. Why is it a concern here and not before? Because between cup 1 and 2, you're allowed to drink more wine. Especially between 2 and 3, you're allowed to drink more wine. Right? So drinking more wine won't make it look like you're adding to the cups. But between 3 and 4, where you're not allowed to be drinking anything, every time you drink wine, it would seem like you're adding a 5th cup of wine. And therefore, if you mistakenly did not drink the first cup of wine properly, don't drink another one to make up for it, because that'll turn it into 5 cups of wine. Follow? So long as you have a view to rely on that it was kosher. So here, I drank my cup of wine in 2 minutes, let's say. In the span of 2 minutes, it took me 2 minutes to drink my cup of wine. So it's longer than the stringent opinion, which says it's got to be within the amount of time it takes to drink a revius. But at least according to the other opinion, I did it right. Because the other opinion says I have to drink it within 3 minutes. So because I have an opinion which says this wine was a good kosher cup of wine, redoing it out of a doubt, you run into a different problem, which is it's going to look like I'm adding a 5th cup. And therefore, for cup 3 and 4, if the person happened to have drunk in such a way that it took them 2 minutes, so it's longer than the revius measure, but shorter than the Kedei cross measure, don't redrink the cup. But by cup 1 and 2, you can redrink it because it doesn't look like it anyway, because you're anyways allowed to add more wine. Right? And therefore, by cup 3 and 4, if you drank it longer than the time frame for drinking a revius, but shorter than the time frame for eating at a pras, you can rely on the first opinion, which said that anyways it was fine because it was in the 3-minute measure. And therefore, the only reason to re-drink cup 3 and 4 in terms of these halachas is if it was so long that between the first sip and the last sip that it was longer than even the eating unit.
Mhm.
In which case, all opinions say your cup was invalid and therefore do it again. Right? Which means it would have to be 9 minutes long, because so long as you're less than 9 minutes, there's at least still some opinion which says it was a good cup of wine, just like Yom Kippur. So which basically means never would you be drinking unless, I don't know, it takes you 10 minutes to sip a couple ounces of wine, maybe. Okay.
Well, I guess you have to be conscious of it.
Well,
You can't just be casually drinking wine. You have to know that you're drinking a cup of wine.
my father always makes that announcement before the 4 cups of wine at the table. We're not enjoying sipping a glass of wine.
Right.
Neither is it a shot of wine.
Right.
We're drinking a meal of wine.
Mm.
So you have to define it as a full measure, both in time and in volume, that constitutes a unit of drinking. Right? It gets back to the same thing before, where the guy drinks 4 cups of wine in a row. We don't consider that 4 cups. We consider that 1 cup,
Right.
because it was 1 unit of wine consumption.
Right.
So number one, no matter how much you go, if it's within that unit, it's just 1 singular unit of consumption. And number 2, you can't be so little that it's not considered a unit of consumption. Can't be so little, A, not in volume too little, and B, not in time frame too little or too long, stretched out too long, that it's no longer a singular unit of consumption. Yeah. Okay. Chaf Aleph. Sorry?
Well, it's interesting that I just noticed it's in English.
Yeah.
Klug glass. Those are like the whiskey sniffers.
Is that what's called?
Yeah.
Ah,
Sniffer?
I thought it was a whiskey sniffer.
Yeah.
Or I guess now I didn't know that's
Yeah,
called. Klug glass.
exactly.
There you go.
Klug glass.
I didn't know that. I guess that's what it was. I didn't know that's what it was.
I mean,
But
I've never heard the term Klug glasses before. But I'm just
Oh, you never heard that term?
No.
Okay, so you're guessing like I did.
Exactly.
You're guessing like I did. Okay.
So where else have you seen those? Like tulip.
Oh,
You
yeah. I
guys
wasn't in
call
Russia
Klug
in
glasses.
the 1700s, so I don't know. Maybe in Russia in 1700s there's some other glass called a Klug glass that was narrow at the top. But I also assume that's one of those things.
Right.
If you have them,
very difficult.
it's actually very difficult to.
True, especially
do.
the nose.
Exactly, it's very difficult. It's designed that way. It's designed to
Right.
make it slow drinking, right?
Right.
So it's designed in such a way that it's difficult to just gulp it down
Right.
because you want to enjoy. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I Googled while we were teaching it, and I came up with Klug decanters, which is also very, very
Right.
narrow.
There you go.
at the top.
Right.
There you go. It's designed to make the beverage come out slowly, so you open the flavors with the air and all that. It's meant for that. Okay. Chaf Aleph. Someone who doesn't drink wine all year long. This happens a lot.
It's glass and
Sorry?
just noticed it says glass on the Hebrew side. It says glass.
It's Yiddish.
Oh,
Klug
really?
glass, it's Yiddish.
Glass is glass in Yiddish.
Glass. With a Z. Which is with a Z, the Zion. Okay, Chaf Aleph. Someone who doesn't drink wine all year long. He plays Shesona because he hates it, doesn't like it. Because it's dangerous to him, it's harmful, gives him stomach aches. So, what do? Af bekin nonetheless. The person is obligated to push himself. To drink the 4 cups of wine. Kamoi, as our sages have said, concerning Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, one of the great formative scholars of the Mishnaic era, is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, one of the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, if I remember correctly. Excuse me. Shoyse Arba Koise Shal Pesach. He would drink 4 cups of wine on Pesach, but afterwards he tzarich lacher tzadav ad atzeres. He had to tie his head with such a headache. He had to walk around with a band on his head
Oh, shit.
because of how much it
Until
was.
Shavuos, yeah.
Say again?
Until Shavuos.
Until Shavuos. That's how much effort went into drinking wine. So having a hangover one day is not an excuse not to drink your 4 cups of wine. But again, as we learned before, you don't have to drink so much. It's not that much. If you have small cups of wine, it's not so much. But apparently, Yehuda Bar Eloi is very sensitive.
Footnote says one may, however, dilute the wine slightly, following the directives mentioned in section
Right.
208.
We mentioned it before, right? It has to get diluted to your liking, but not so much that it becomes not hagafen anymore.
Right.
Okay, halacha chaf beis. Aval kat kiddush Shar Yom Tov Mishaboses, but kiddush on other times during the year, Yom Tov and Shabbos, ain't tzarich litzlekas atzma l'shtes kais. You don't have to push yourself to drink a cup of wine. Number one, yachal l'shmoya kiddush ma'acher. You can listen to someone else make kiddush. You're not obligated to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You're obligated to recite kiddush, and you can do so by listening to someone else. The motion is.
You can make it on bread.
Oh, see a second. Does he add that option here? He doesn't. I'm wondering why didn't it make that option? Yeah, good point. You could do it on bread. Well, actually, not always can do it on bread. There's some no, you could do it on bread. Yeah, why didn't he say that? Good question. I thought I was about to say that actually. I don't know why I didn't mention that here. Good question.
Sorry to backtrack. If
Yeah.
you're going to dilute.
Yeah.
So you need to put your these in and then water on top of it, for example.
I don't think it matters which way you dilute it. Not that I know.
So the full measure needs to be what it needs to be.
At the end, yeah.
And
That's the result in revius. You don't have to have a revius of wine, then water it. As long as the total at the end is a revius.
I see.
That was the Koisiyafa, right? Okay, so you can listen to someone else make Kiddush commission as Bar B'Simen Ayin Reish Beis, as explained in chapter 272, which we learned. But this is not the case with regard to the 4 cups of wine. Even members of the household, and they're not, let's say, members of the household who cannot read Hebrew. So they're not reciting Haggadah, nor are they even making Kiddush. They're listening.
Mm-hmm.
They have to drink the 4 cups of wine. Which means, in theory, in fact, it seems as though this is the way the Seder used to be, which was that,
By a scholar.
the leader would read this Haggadah. Nobody else would. Everybody else would be listening in and only chiming in when it came to ask questions or whatever. And that's how you fulfill your obligation. And you can do so with Kiddush too. But the drinking of the wine, you got to do yourself. Right? Each person is obligated in the 4 cups of wine, in a manner that reflects freedom. So enjoying the wine, leaning, and so on. Let's see footnote 88. Psachim 109b, which is what we learned. See which explains that the words in a manner that reflects freedom highlights the difference between the 4 cups of wine drunk on Pesach and the wine of Kiddush. Right? Where throughout the year, Kiddush doesn't have to be drunk in a manner of freedom. It's just got to be drunk in a healthy manner. It is sufficient to hear another recite Kiddush. There's no fundamental obligation for every listener to partake of the wine on a regular Shabbos. Right? We do so because you want to share the cup of blessing, but the listener does not have to drink. As long as they hear and answer Amen, which is presumably what a guy like Rabbi Levi would have done. Right? Where wine is so painful for him. On Pesach, by contrast, in addition to reciting or listening to the blessing, every person has an obligation to partake of the wine as an expression of freedom, which is what we learned before. See section 14 above and section 47.4.2 below. In section 473.24, the Alter Rebbe writes that the members of the person's household should listen to the head of the household recite the Haggadah, as opposed to reading it themselves. Right? Divrei Shalom is Rabbi Shalom Ber Levin, who is the Rebbe's librarian, who's very much responsible for the beautiful versions of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Haggadah that's available today. He dedicated his life to this, and he's really the entire Jewish world owes him a debt of thanks for the work he's put into bringing the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch to the masses and putting all the footnotes we have come from him, the sources and the beautiful layout, finding the manuscripts in the library and getting it correct, and so on and so forth. It's all on him. So Divrei Shalom maintains that this directive that everybody should listen to the leader applies to the Kiddush too. Even in such an instance, however, it is preferable that they drink their own cups. See section 24. In many households, however, it is customary that every person recites Kiddush himself, as is the common practice, at least in my home. We all recite the Kiddush together on Pesach night, and we all recite the Haggadah together. Although technically speaking, that isn't the case. And if I remember correctly, that's how if I'm not mistaken, the Sephardim many do it that way, where the leader leads and everybody chants in when they're supposed to. But the leader is the one that reads everything out loud for everybody else. Is that correct? I believe many families are like that, where the leader reads out loud and everybody else follows along and kind of chants in and during the songs at the right times. Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. The Torah describes it as a dialogue, right? Your son asks you a question, you answer. So it's meant to be one person responding and interacting with everybody, as opposed to everybody just reciting. That's like the theoretically way it's done. Although, again, our custom is that everybody reads it. But that will come. We'll discuss that more when we get to 473, which will come in a while. Okay, stop here, and God willing, tomorrow we will continue on Monday. Shkoyach, Terry. A wonderful day, a big Shabbos, and the Shem's help, we'll hear good news locally and abroad for everyone. They can Mashiach now. So enough with all this garbage.
Alan should have a